Hey, Curator Coy here. So where we're standing at right now is the upper left side of Enclosure 1, and in particular this is our perimeter fence here. If you'll recall, we have two sets of fencing, concentric rectangles, the outermost being a perimeter fence and the innermost being bare enclosure fencing. And so with what we're looking at doing now for the expansion and what we're trying to fundraise for is we would really like to have an Enclosure 5. So today I'd like to walk you through the process and all the planning that we have put forth to really come up with the best and most cost-effective way of creating a whole lot larger space, an enclosure space, and it's right adjacent to all the 4 enclosures that we currently have. So if you'll walk with me down through here. Now obviously, to get to this new enclosure, Enclosure 5, which will be far down that way, we'll need a road, just like any other wild enclosure. And so if you'll look right here, this area is somewhat thinned out as part of a Firewise project that we did several years back. And so we will end up cutting in a new road that will start up here at the original well house, and it will come all the way down through here and terminate and have a large turnaround space so that, you know, we will have larger trucks in here pulling transfer traps and what have you, so we need turnaround space. And obviously there's going to be a lot of work involved here to fill in these gullies with a lot of shell and gravel and just a lot of excavation. So that's just one piece of this project, and where a lot of the money will end up going as well. The good news is cutting in this road, we really won't have to take out many trees, especially trees of real good value as they apply to bears and other wildlife species. So that's always good to consider whenever you're going to be cutting in roads or clearing out any kind of space and involving some deforestation. So now we are standing at the lower left corner of the perimeter fence of Enclosure 1, and if you will look just down that way, that's the lower right corner perimeter section of Enclosure 2. And I mentioned earlier about making an Enclosure 5 in the most cost-effective way as possible. So actually what we will end up doing to save cost is we will utilize this fencing that's here, or at least the post. Some of the chain link will have to be upgraded for code. So some of it's 11 gauge chain link, some of it is 9. Anywhere that it's 11 will be retrofitted to be 9 gauge, and that's just that's per our permit with the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. We'll also have to dig in a skirt all the way across through here from this corner post all the way to the opposite of Enclosure 2 to have chain link fence that goes down in the ground a foot and then in this way actually 3 feet. So this will actually be this portion, the enclosure fencing for Enclosure 5. As with all of our other enclosure spaces, we do have a buffer area that goes around them. So if you can just look into this area here, it will be the same. Since this will be the Enclosure 5 fencing, you can walk all the way around Enclosure 5 on this end, as well as if you look down through here, I don't know how you'll be able to see it on the camera so far, but there is a tree where I'm pointing down there that has a blaze orange marking paint on it. So the lower left corner of Enclosure 5 will actually butt up in that area, and it will be double fenced again. So you'll have a perimeter fence and an enclosure fence. We will have to do some excavating in here and a little bit more tree removal. However, we will be able to walk around the perimeter of the entire Enclosure 5. And so just to give you an idea, if you'll look this way, all of this wooded area here, this whole lot, it's approximately 2 acres. As we make our way toward Enclosures 3 and 4, which are really just right over there, this will all be in Enclosure 5, so you can kind of get an idea of everything that the bears or these enclosures are going to encompass here for the bears. And so with all this, with such a huge lot, you're adding a whole lot more habitat. The chances of them finding a better place to den, especially as we move toward overwintering bears, that's something that we're considering to do. That will it will certainly increase the odds of them finding a better or more suitable den for each individual bear. And it's also going to help having this larger space to mitigate any kind of stereotypic processes that they may start to develop as far as being a captive wild animal. And by stereotypic behavior, things such as pacing. I know you all have seen that before. And so when bears start pacing along fences, you know, we're hoping that providing a much larger space will help with that. It'll also help with having new bears coming in from different areas and being housed together for the first time to really have their own sets of space within a larger enclosure to help mitigate any kind of conflict that would maybe occur, you know, at first. So if you'll follow me on down this direction, I'll take you to the lower left corner of what will be Enclosure 5 and kind of lay out the zoning for the new Enclosure 5 to kind of help you all get a real idea of how large this enclosure will be. So come on. So I'll just point this out really quick. If you'll look up this way and then back down this direction, you'll notice that what will run through the center part of Enclosure 5 is sloped. It's a drainage kind of area. This is a really good thing whenever you're going to house bears and stuff. You want the enclosures to be able to kind of drain themselves, but what you don't want is a big what I call a gully washer after a heavy rain or flood come through here. And so we have been down here whenever it's raining heavily just to monitor for that, and from what we can understand, we never see that here. So it does allow for slight drainage, but it's nothing that's just going to wash out the enclosure. So that's just another thing that you would always want to pay attention to whenever thinking about where to set an enclosure down. So for any of you that saw this from way up there, great job. If you didn't, this is what I was talking about, this tree that we have marked. So the lower left corner of what will be Enclosure 5 will be somewhere in this general area. Over in this area will be the turnaround portion that I was telling you all about. So again, to bring trucks down that are pulling barrel traps or what have you, we need to be able to not just get down here, but to turn those vehicles around and get them back up the hill. So I'm not sure how clear this still is. We spent a lot of time and effort clearing out a pathway so that the fence company in Nashville, Rio Grande Fencing, could actually mark this off and take a wheel and measure it to give us an idea and a quote for the fencing job. And so you'll just have to bear with me walking through here, and hopefully I don't fall or anything. If I do, it'll be funny for you all. So come on. So this whole section right here will be what will be the longest side or segment of Enclosure 5, and it's going to run about 500 feet from the lower left corner toward the lower right corner of Enclosure 5. As I mentioned, we were looking for cost-effective ways to save on cost and still provide what we need for our Class 1 wildlife permit for bears And so I showed you all the enclosure 1 and 2 fence that we will reuse portions of to help save costs on that. What I didn't mention then was any of the fencing that is 11 gauge that we have to take down and replace with 9, we will actually reuse that 11 gauge wire as part of the perimeter fence that comes around here, because it's totally fine to use 11 gauge for the perimeter fencing. So if you look out this direction, we're kind of on a little slope area up here, and I think part of this may have been an old road bed of some sort, but this will be the interior of enclosure 5. And so you can see there's plenty of trees to pick from, to climb, and hopefully maybe some really great areas to den in. Also, what you may notice is there are several pines. And so pine trees are great and all, but if any of you have any homes in wooded areas, say a cabin up here in the Smokies, you'll know right off the bat that a heavy wind or ice storm, those pines are going to come down. It's very likely. In fact, if we turn around and look right here behind us, we already had one happen very recently, and you can actually see when this does occur, the root ball over there, it just uproots everything. The root system is not very good on these pines, and unfortunately, what we need to do is, this will be some prep work. We need to get in here and cut as many of these down as possible. We've always done that throughout all the 4 enclosure spaces, and so that's just some more work that we'll have to plan for. We do have several large pines in this area, so just to prevent any kind of catastrophic failure of our enclosure 5 setup and bears escaping, it's just good to go ahead and be proactive on that. Well, now we're back up here on the track. I'm sure Curator Ashley is grateful for that. That's who's filming. And you can see it continues on the area that we have cleared out, and where fence will kind of roll in. There may be some wiggle room here and there. We may push it back a little further. That just really depends on the lay of the land once the excavating equipment gets to us. So this right here is actually a fresh blowdown. This wasn't here last time I was here. So again, these pine species, notorious for that. So if you'll look over this way, you can see we're starting to get very near enclosures 3 and 4. So the lower left corner of enclosure 5 buds up to the lower left corner of enclosure 1. The lower right corner of enclosure 5 will actually butt up to the lower right corner of enclosure 4. And hopefully after making this video, and whenever you all actually get to see it, we will have like an image superimposed on the video, so it's a quick reference diagram to really show you a bird's eye view of the layout of number 5, and really the how much sense it makes to have them all connected, and you'll see what I'm talking about whenever we overlay that image. As mentioned, there's the lower right corner of the perimeter fence for enclosure 4. And so our 500-foot segment of fencing will come to about right here, and then jut down that way and butt up to that corner. And so when we get down here, I'll walk you all through another way that we've saved a ton of cost on enclosure 5. the good news about this perimeter fence in enclosures 3 and 4 is that we've already used non-gauge chain link fencing. So if you remember the requirement that I mentioned earlier, this whole entire length of this segment, the perimeter of 3 and 4, which is roughly 300 feet long, already uses the right chain link. So this will be a wall of enclosure 5. We'll just have to add skirting. Goes down a foot, in 3.
That was Coy trying to pretend like he's a nice guy. Just kidding.
Also, part of the cost, I haven't mentioned this yet, but you guys will recall, if you followed us long enough, that we put intruder fencing up all the way around the perimeter of enclosures 1 and 2, and also 3 and 4. So that's these 2 lines of electricity here to keep outsider or intruder bears out. That will also have to be done for the whole segment of enclosure 5. So for the last leg, or to close in enclosure 5, it will start right here at the lower left corner of enclosure 3's perimeter fencing and run to the lower right corner of enclosure 2's perimeter fencing. So we'll have about a 90-foot section of double fencing that goes from here to there. And then there you have it. In enclosure 5, it's roughly 2 acres. So if you compare that back to enclosures 1 through 4, they're about ½ an acre apiece. So, like any other animal, bears are going to need water, and so we'll have to run ditches and have a plumb for water all the way down to enclosure 5. Obviously that's going to be a big expense, but a necessary one. And bears need water, curators need electricity, and camera lines and cameras to power the fencing and the cameras. So those are more trenches that we'll need to dig and supply enclosure 5 with. We've already thought ahead, so right here where a water line comes in underneath the ground, we filled it in obviously, but we also have electric ran all the way to here, so we'll just continue straight on down toward enclosure 5.